Yo, can we talk about Nikke for a second? Those of you who've stuck with the channel for a while know that I actually have a track record for making first impression videos for mobile games. Considering their addictive nature and varying levels of quality, I have found many unit collector gacha games to be fairly amusing at worst, and downright sinful at their best. And Nikke manages to hit a happy medium for me where it's extremely amusing but strikes a lot of chords with me to be a longer lasting game that I actually stick with out of the extremely oversaturated genre that is unit collector gacha. So let's get into why that is. So unless you don't really have a whole lot of experience or exposure to this sort of thing, you've undoubtedly had Nikke described to you at one point or another as some really degenerate shooting gallery. It's got a bit of fame associated to it, or infamy, depending on whether or not your glass is half full, in the form of its degeneracy. And look, I'm not going to sit here and gaslight the world by saying I don't understand where this claim comes from. You have a nice, view of the battlefield, and how the recoil of the guns affect the world around it. I'm not dense, I get it, but I will say that this gets a bit exaggerated. Both from inside and outside of the player base, by the way. Nikke definitely has its moments, but can we at least be fair around the board? If we're gonna bust Nikke's balls for being a bit over the top with sexualizing its characters, then at least do the same for all forms of anime media. I mean, for Pete's sake, Naraka Blade Point isn't degen at all, but they have a character that's literally a walking sexual innuendo.
Was that too rough for you? Oh, always use protection.
The shadow.
Anyways, I'm not going to cherry pick, I'll drop the topic here, but the point is this. Nikke is a surprisingly well-made game. From the in-game mechanics to the game experience all the way through to its sound design, the game just feels very satisfying to play, and it's pretty much designed so that you don't have to sacrifice your firstborn child to the goddess of victory in order to sink enough time into progressing through the game. You see, a lot of your progress is actually a passive accumulation of resources over time. There are things you can do as a player to speed this process up, one of which is a literal resource dump of the paid currency, but unless you're an actual whale that can afford to wipe out 11 times a day and beeline your progression to the top of the leaderboards at the start of a server, then the pay-to-win strat isn't going to affect you in any meaningful way. Now, of course, there are forms of content that you need to clear in order to get certain things, like the simulation room, where you can obtain items to improve individual skills on your Nikkes, or interception, for getting gear to improve their hard stats, where you have to battle your anxiety against a giant fucking worm while the game blasts high-speed techno house music into your earholes. Shut up, game, I'm having a panic attack at the moment. The game has frequent events where you can literally clear all 12 of the normal event story missions on day 1 if you don't mind spending a little bit of currency to do, which is extremely easy even for casual free-to-play players. Side dungeons with mini puzzles in them that award you with harmony cubes to equip on your Nikkes and boost their stats even further, which can also be upgraded. Tribe Tower, which is basically Aincrad from Sword Art Online. PvP. Because how else are you going to have whales prove that they have more money than... And of course the campaign story. The point of me highlighting all of the general content in the game is because with all of these activities, none of them are exactly something grindable. You see, when you go through the story, whatever enemies that you clear out are gone for good. That is it. That doesn't diminish the value of clearing the story, however, because every 5 stages you complete increases your passive resource gains. But this can be kind of jarring to a new player. It's entirely possible for you to clear all of your missions that you have the ability to clear at the moment, and then have to wait until you're stronger to go further into the game and unlock some new shit. I don't think this is even a problem for the majority of players, but it is worth noting. Like I said before, Nikke is a bit more passive of a gacha game than most. Nikke is like that really quiet female friend of yours that's really enjoyable to talk to, but has bad social anxiety, so you rarely get to talk to her unless you speak first. Now, there are pros and cons to this approach, but I do like that you can just pop in, do your dailies in 30 minutes, and then fuck off and play an actual first-person shooter like Fortnite. It scratches the dopamine receptors in your brain that tell you to click heads, and I appreciate that. And because it doesn't overstay its welcome and require that you play the game like a full-time job and check in every few hours like a preteen girl addicted to social media in order to maximize your efficiency, it has a longer shelf time than, well, a lot of the previous mobile games that I've played. I don't feel as compelled to log in daily because God forbid that I miss the new login for a new OP unit, and I don't feel absolutely exhausted trying to clear content for the game due to the natural downtime that exists in Nikke. Now look, I know a lot of this is anecdotal, but the fact that the game is sort of designed around its passive progression with a handful of time-locked resource-gaining shooting galleries that you can clear in 12 minutes flat, makes it a lot more convenient for a player to establish that quote-unquote Sigma male grind set without simultaneously ruining their social life for it. Assuming, of course, you like to go outside, that is. Look, I know it's scary outside and all, but I promise you, the sunlight feels nice on your vitamin D-starved flesh every now and again. Try it sometime. Okay, now we've talked about the gameplay loop more or less. You shoot some robots, you win, you move to the next shooting gallery, and do it again while passively getting stronger piece by piece. But what about the actual gameplay? Well, you're looking at it, my dude. You have 5 units that form your firing squad for the stage, who will all fire autonomously at targets in the background. Your Nikke you are currently controlling is aiming wherever that you click on the screen. Each Nikke has a magazine size. Yes, I need to clarify that it is indeed a magazine, and not a clip, or the gun nuts will give me the rolled-up newspaper. And this magazine size dictates when the reload animation triggers and your Nikke takes cover to refill the mag. Each Nikke has a designated weapon type that affects how the shooting and reloading feels, but we'll go over that later. You may notice that your Nikke also has 2 health bars. Believe it or not, this does not mean that your Nikkes are mini tanks that have an armor bar. No, your mind is not ready for that amount of sheer badassery. The white bar is their health bar, in which when depleted means that your Nikke is out of action for the fight, and the innocuous little blue bar that you see poking its head out above it is your cover health. I think it's a pretty cool idea, honestly. If you tap your active Nikke's picture at the bottom of the screen, your squad will be behind cover. And this completely prevents damage from most attacks. I say most because there are some enemies in the game that just don't seem to give a fuck about your cover. Yeah, we'll talk about you in a little bit. Beyond this, there's also a burst system in the game. Each Nikke has 2 passive skills and an active burst skill, with the Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, or apparently 5 now as of Red Ash, and as you shoot the burst meter fills. When the burst meter fills completely, you activate your Nikke's Bankai, and they can join with the power of friendship in a sequence of 1, 2, and 3 burst skills to activate a burst mode, which increases damage, gains the benefits of any passive abilities from your burst skills, and makes all of your Nikkes apparently flip on their laser PQ devices and show the enemies they're no longer fucking around. Yes, I know gun terms. I am American. In short, burst mode uptime is an essential thing to set up if you want to maximize your success in this game. Now, of course, combat is a little more in-depth than this, and, some enemies are designed to be prioritized before others, otherwise they attack. Bosses have those fucking targeting circles that give me anxiety. There's this part-breaking system that knocks a chunk of health off of an enemy if you do enough damage to it, as well as a few more mechanics. And while I would love to sing the praises of this and say something stupid and generic like this makes combat feel refreshing and engaging because of the in-depth mechanics for its enemies, in actuality, from what I've seen, you can bypass really any mechanic in this game by simply having bigger numbers and paying attention to your burst skill uptime. That is it. Aim at circles, bust parts off with manual aiming, burst skills, and then hit the cover button once a subscription and you will do just fine. It's not in-depth and it's not challenging. It just feels good, and that's all it really needs to be. Now, the real fun in this game comes from the squad compositions that you can come up with. Remember when I mentioned earlier about weapon types? Well, each Nikke is part of a weapon class. Those classes are assault rifles, machine guns, submachine guns, shotguns, launchers, and sniper rifles. ARs are the well-rounded weapons with acceptable range, the basic bitch anime protagonist starter pack, if you will. Machine guns are super high capacity, sporting solid damage at the downside of having a wind-up time before spitting out lead faster than any other weapon class in the game. MGs are great to have when everything absolutely, positively must die. At least it is until you need to reload for the next 5 years. SMGs are the close range, high rate of fire, and high DPS weapon choice. Unlike most FPS games, they won't dominate the game meta because sometimes an enemy is just too far away for your 1200 RPM pea shooter to reach. But they will still shred the absolute fuck out of anything close range. Shotguns are the SMG's slower, angrier, and more well-endowed friend. They have some AoE to them, so the game advertises shotguns as a crowd-clearing tool, which isn't entirely wrong, but trust me, shotguns are a howitzer for boss encounters. Launchers are a weapon class that have limitless range fall-off in AoE, but charge out by continuing to aim at your enemy, which increases the damage scaling to some pretty absurd levels. I don't really like launchers in terms of weapon mechanics too much, but they definitely have their use. Plus, Noise is a launcher, and I absolutely adore her.
How was my live today? I'm a little worried.
And then finally there's sniper rifles, easily one of the hardest hitting single point weapons in the game that charge up similarly to launchers. They're designed to 360 no-scope whatever noobs happen to match into the lobby with you, or in Red Ash's case, designed to annihilate you with a giant fuck you laser beam. choose wisely. Now, building an efficient team involves a few factors. You need the right weapons for the appropriate range coverage and utility, you need the right skill setup for burst mode uptime, and you would want general team synergy with their skills to accomplish whatever the goal is that you're aiming at. Now, obviously, putting together a team of all healers and buffers is going to scale better if you have some high damage units involved with it. So it would behoove you to place an attacker or two in there with offensive skills with a little extra oomph to add to your party. I can sit here all day and talk about the team building, what works and what doesn't, but figuring this stuff out is literally the most fun part of the game. Nikke literally encourages the player to experiment with their team compositions. But Fox, isn't this a gacha game? What if you don't have good luck on pulls? Well, my ignorant little cherub, allow me to introduce you to the single most innovative thing I have ever seen in a gacha unit collector game in my life. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the synchronization device. You see, one of the biggest shortcomings of these sort of games comes from being hard stuck because the RNG of unit pulls and power creep is being a real dingus. You see, Nikke, like other games of its type, involves pulling multiple copies of units in order to increase their maximum level and their stats. Not to mention that you spend valuable resources to level up your units, which means you are incentivized to improve a unit that you will still be using late into the game because they have a high stat ceiling. But what if you were to have systems in place to prevent you from wasting your fucking time investing resources into a unit to get them up to par with your main set only to realize that you just don't like them? That is what the synchronization device is about. You see, the lowest level of your 5 highest level Nikkes dictates the level that all of your Nikkes will be locked to, that you put into the synchronization device. You can only put a handful of other Nikkes into the device at first, but you can also spend an equal amount of currency as a 10 pull in the unit gacha to increase that capacity by 6 units. I would suggest newer players invest more currency into this system than into the gacha system at the start, just so that they have a good roster to use. Honestly, I love the synchronization device, and I will stand over it any day of the week by saying that it is single-handedly the greatest thing that I have ever seen in a game like Nikke. It makes it so that you can pull a shiny new SSR unit, and then they're just viable straight out of the box, and I adore that. And speaking of unit pulls, I think it's about time to talk about the gacha system. I don't know what else to say here, guys. It sucks. Now hold on there, champ. For the non-zero amount of people who disagree with my reductive summary of Nikke's gacha system, let me actually go into the details. The rates in this game are fucking abysmal. They are actually some of the worst pull rates I have ever fucking seen in any gacha game to this day. Now, on paper, it sounds great. A 4% chance to pull a high-rarity SSR unit in the game sounds pretty solid compared to, I don't know, let's say Genshin Impact, which has the paltry 0.6 chance to pull a 5-star. And it's easy to write that off as Nikke being the more forgiving system, but it's not. You see, a lot of gacha games have a pity system that allows you to get a guaranteed pull of a higher rarity if the RNG is really starting to peg you all rough and dirty. Now, Nikke technically has this pity system, but it requires you to pull specifically from a limited banner 200 times. Then you can get the limited unit from the store with golden mileage tickets. And that's all fine and dandy, but what if there's a specific SSR unit in the normal unit lineup that you want, say Scarlet? Well, good fucking luck, my dude, because Pilgrim units aren't even in the wishlist system, which lets you increase the chance of pulling SSR units of either Elysian, Tetra, and Missilus types, respectively. Pilgrims are among some of the most overpowered units in Nikke, and you just sort of need to hope to the RNG gods that they drop for you. Never mind getting dupes to increase their level caps. Now, to give due diligence to the system, all you really need is one of the units to drop, and then you can exchange black mileage tickets that you get every time that you pull on the non-limited banners to get one of their spare bodies, which are sold in the mileage shop. And this refreshes daily, so you will eventually, in time, guarantee a duplicate of a unit by simply playing the game. So to clarify, spare bodies are given to you whenever that you pull a duplicate of a unit that you already own, and it's consumed to increase their level cap, so it's effectively a second unit that is specifically used for increasing their core stats. These systems do exist, I'm not gonna lie and pretend that they don't, but the problem is trying to get new SSR units to drop, especially the Pilgrims. Never mind getting duplicates of specific units that you enjoy running, like Pilgrims. I'm sure you're noticing a trend here. And the reason why I make the comparison to Genshin Impact is because at least your chance for pulling a 5-star increases by 0.6% every time that you miss, which will guarantee you a 5-star unit eventually after enough pulls. Nikke limits you to only doing this with limited banners, not the all-around banners that are around constantly. Now, to argue in favor of this system, what I will say is that it is extremely easy for a new player to max out every SR unit in the game due to the abysmal rates and how few SR units actually exist in the game. There are a total of 13 SR units in the game, and only 9 of them are in the gacha. There's also 9 R rarity units that you will literally never use, meaning that you will see the same 18 units pulled from the gacha system frequently. This makes it very easy for a casual player to get 5 level locked SR units to bring up to level 160, before even thinking about getting some maxed out SSRs to level further than that with the synchronization device that I love so goddamn much. And in all fairness, you never really need to use SSRs with 2 spare bodies versus boosted Nikkes that are synchronized, at least not up to the level 160 area that I'm about to reach soon. I've never noticed a substantial difference in performance between the two. I'm sure there are spreadsheets out there to prove me wrong, but I stand by this point. I know the last paragraph and point just seems like a backhanded compliment to go ahead and give Nikke to the shitty gacha systems, but just, in my opinion, it seems like it's intentional, but it's just a shame that literally 80% of the gacha is in the highest rarity tier bracket, and it's just such a ball ache to be able to work with that system to upgrade Nikkes that you really like using. Like, I don't know, it just feels like the game needs a couple more lower rarity units that people would actually give a shit about. But anyway, regardless, we're going to move on to the last thing that I want to talk about before ending the video, and that is the soundtrack, which makes up a good portion of the overall game experience. Simply put, if you didn't think that the Tunnel Destroyer track that I played earlier was a bop, then you are literally a psychopath. This game's soundtrack is one of the best parts of the game. Like, literally, this is the opening track you hear when starting up the game. Nikke does not shy away from being the dark, depressing, dystopian future shooter game that it is, and that's probably why I vibe with it so well. This is literally Girls' Frontline for casuals. I'm not a big story-obsessed person in video games, especially in gacha games of all else, but the opening chapter of this game is such a good hook into the rest of it. It's not exactly original, but for all of the people out there who need to hear this, you don't need an original idea for it to be good. Those two concepts are not mutually exclusive, and call me crazy, but I have just always been a fan of games that aren't afraid to smack you in the face with a dark reality. This is very hit or miss depending on the story, but so long as it isn't trying too hard to be edgy, it usually scratches that itch quite well. And without spoiling the game's first chapter, this is the first boss OST of the game that you hear.
Reloading.
It's got this haunting mixture of determination and clinical depression that bounce in and out of each other, and it's very fitting for the first boss and what it represents. On one hand, you have the grim reality of the enemy that you're up against, yet on the other hand, you're thinking, like hell, am I gonna roll over and die here? It's anime as fuck, and I love it. So I know I said I was going to wrap up the video here, but yeah, you know what, fuck it, script writing is hard. I'm just gonna spill my guts about shit I don't like about this game now. Alright, cool, let's move on. So to start, I know I said the gacha rates feel like ass, but I should also point out that this also stems into the little free SSR pull consumables that you get in the game. In short, you get 50 of these little gem-like consumables that are gold, and they can also be based on manufacturer, and you're supposed to pull a shiny new SSR. Except 50% of the time, you actually don't, because the rates are just awful with them. It is super exploitative, it robs you, I hate it, and you should too. Next is Liberation. Why the hell is the meter designed to look like this? I mean, you guys see the problem here, right? That bar looks like a misleading graph in my 5th grade textbook. Also, what's the deal with the shinies that you collect in stages? It is neither fun nor engaging to walk along the outside wall of every map to find necessary items to expand my outpost. Stop it. And as for that Tunnel Destroyer boss, we're going to revisit that here. Aside from it terrorizing me for months with the absurd spike in difficulty and health versus everything else in the game up to that point, and the train, why in the ever-loving shitfuck do the target circles have to move around like they're on crack? Listen, I'm a competitive FPS player, and even with mouse and keyboard aiming, accurate target acquisition of these circles is an impossible task when the stage shifts around like that. So, yeah, good luck cell phone users. And finally, the effects. For the love of God, the effects in Nikke do far too well a job of obscuring my mouse cursor. Look, I know the game is designed for cell phones and all, but I'm amazed the cursor doesn't change in the window to be more visible in those moments when the game decided to skullfuck my retinas. So, yeah, Nikke is a really solid mobile game, whether or not that we like it. It's a gacha game that held my attention long term that wasn't Girls Frontline, and while a lot of that is because there are parallels between them, the reality is that it achieved this through its design. I've never gotten bored of this game because I've simply never burned myself out on the grind. And the synchronization device allows me to sample out any new characters I happen to pull from the gacha system right out of the box. So I always have something new to play with. And while I won't argue that there isn't a lot of grind in the game, that grind can be enjoyed if the process of what you're doing from point A to point B is enjoyable. And that has been true for me the entire time that I've been playing Nikke. And sure, it's true that the girls constantly bounce around to and fro as you light up robots watching the game play itself. Unless you're a prepubescent teenage boy who's never seen what a naked woman looks like before, though, no one playing Nikke is frothing at the fucking mouth over the jiggle physics and upskirts the game throws your way. It's simply anime, my dudes. It's excessive and exaggeratory. It's what makes the game fun. And, yeah, that about wraps up everything I have to say here. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. I spent money for the first time in this game since I started playing it about a year ago to get Privaty's new dress. Yes, that's her actual in-game name, Privity. And you will gawk at it while the video fades. That is all. Go home. Leave.
Why are you staring at me like that?